I got home from a long job rewiring an old farmhouse, one of those dusty, no AC jobs that makes you question every life choice, and found my entire back fence gone. Just gone, like it had never existed. Instead, there was a brand new sign planted right in the churned up soil where my dog used to do his morning rounds. Community Trail Entrance, Willow Ridge HOA property. I stood there, still in my work boots, holding a lukewarm gas station coffee and blinking at the damn thing like it might change into something sane if I stared long enough. My dog, Rusty, trotted up beside me and let out one of those low, confused whines like, "Did we move and no one told me?" And I swear to God, before I could even start yelling at the wind, this guy in an orange vest walks across my yard like he owns the place, glances at me and says, "Oh, you must be the tenant. You missed the appeal deadline." The what now? I looked around, my tool shed still there, the oak tree I planted with my dad still casting its crooked shadow over the grass, my own damn truck parked in my own damn driveway, and said the only thing that made sense at the time. "Buddy, you've got about 5 seconds to explain what universe you think you're standing in." And that was the day I found out that the HOA, the same one I had nothing to do with and never signed up for, had apparently decided my land was now their land. Starting with my fence. You know, my dad always said fences were about more than property lines. Good fences, he told me while hammering in that last stubborn post, keep the peace. They say, this is mine, that is yours. Let's both stay on our side and we'll get along just fine. He built that fence himself, every rail, every post. Spent 2 full weekends in the Georgia heat sweating over it just because he wanted to. Not because anyone told him to, not because it was in some bylaw with a fancy font. Just because it mattered. I was 14 then, more interested in dirt bikes and cassette tapes than post-hole diggers, but even I knew that fence meant something. It was the last big project we did together before his heart gave out the following spring. That stretch of split rail and wire became the edge of our world, and later, mine. Dad left me the house when he passed. Modest, 1-story, brick and stubborn. Same as him. It sat on just under 2 acres that backed up to some undeveloped woodland. A rare find around here. The rest of the area got gobbled up by developers in the early 2000s, and what used to be cow fields turned into pristine little boxes with vinyl siding and matching mailboxes. The HOA came with them, of course. Willow Ridge Estates, complete with monthly newsletters about paint colors, lawn heights, and how your garbage shouldn't be visible from the street unless you wanted a friendly citation taped to your front door. But my land? My land was grandfathered in. It was carved out way before the HOA was a twinkle in some real estate lawyer's eye. I was never part of their little neighborhood association, and I liked it that way. I fixed up the house myself over the years, ran my electrical business out of the workshop in the back, and walked Rusty along the tree line every morning like clockwork. We didn't bother anyone, and we sure as hell expected the same courtesy in return. So yeah, when I got home that afternoon and saw the fence ripped out like someone had declared war, I wasn't just mad, I was stunned. Not just because it was illegal or disrespectful or financially stupid, which it was, by the way. Oak posts aren't cheap, but because it felt personal. They didn't just tear down some wood, they tore down the line that said, "This is where my world starts and yours ends." And as I'd soon find out, they did it on purpose. The first sign something was off came a couple weeks earlier, but I didn't think much of it at the time. I'd gotten this letter in the mail, one of those glossy envelope jobs with Willow Ridge HOA Beautification Committee printed all fancy in the return address like they were running a spa and not a suburban dictatorship. I nearly tossed it straight into the recycling, but something about it caught my eye. Maybe it was the weight of the paper. Felt smug. So I opened it. Inside was this friendly recommendation that I consider removing my rear fence to enhance neighborhood cohesion and ensure unimpeded community trail access. Which was already weird because A, there's no damn community trail on my land, and B, I'm not in their HOA. Like, I've told them this, out loud, multiple times, with diagrams, once even with snacks, trying to keep it civil. But sure, let's pretend it's normal to send official-looking letters to someone whose name isn't even in your database about land you don't control, with a tone that makes it sound like you're doing them a favor. I didn't reply, figured silence was safer than sarcasm, which is my default when people insult my intelligence. But then a week later, I came home to find one of those little orange utility flags stuck just inside my fence line. You know the kind they use before digging up your yard? Bright, cheerful, and wildly out of place in the middle of my grass. I thought maybe someone had wandered over from the HOA greenbelt behind my lot, maybe marked something by accident. I pulled it up, threw it in the shed, and didn't think much of it. Until 3 more appeared the next day. Now, I don't know if you've ever had your private land flagged like it's up for auction, but let me tell you, it gets under your skin real quick. So I did what any halfway reasonable adult would do. I walked over to the HOA office the next morning, figuring I'd talk to whoever was in charge and clear it up. That's when I met her. Deirdre Langford, president of the HOA, polished, composed, with that look people get when they've been in charge too long and no one's told them no in a while. She greeted me like I was a drop-in from some door-to-door carpet cleaning service, smiled with her mouth, not her eyes, offered me a complimentary HOA pen, which I declined on account of still having a soul. I explained, again, that I wasn't part of the HOA, that my property was outside their governance, that their letters and flags were crossing a line, literally and figuratively. Deirdre didn't miss a beat. She folded her hands on the table and said with absolute confidence, "Actually, Mr. Ellison, your property falls under Section D-3 adjacency considerations as outlined in the Willow Ridge Community Planning Addendum, which is HOA speak for, we made up a rule just now and we're going to pretend it matters." I blinked. "I'm sorry, what?" She launched into this pre-rehearsed speech about shared visibility corridors and natural continuity of park space and some garbage about how fences disrupt the visual harmony of neighborhood access zones. Like we were in a Thomas Kincaid painting, not rural Georgia. I cut her off. "Deirdre, I've lived here 12 years. I've paid every cent of my taxes. I don't use your clubhouse, I don't vote in your meetings, and I sure as hell didn't ask you to harmonize my property." She smiled, sharp and tight. "Well, perhaps it's time to consider the greater good." That's when I knew. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This wasn't bureaucracy gone lazy. This was deliberate. They wanted my fence gone because they wanted my land. And this was their opening move. The escalation didn't come all at once. That would have been too obvious. No, they went with the slow burn harassment method, subtle enough to seem like coincidence, but steady enough to feel like psychological warfare. First, it was the people. Joggers started cutting through my backyard like it was part of the community trail. Not near it, through it. I came out one morning with my coffee and nearly tripped over a guy in a neon tank top doing yoga 10 feet from my workshop. He just looked up at me and said, "Oh, I thought this was the trailhead." I looked at him, looked at the freshly mowed private yard he was standing in, looked at Rusty, who was staring at him like, should I bite this guy or what? And said, "You thought my garage was a park feature?" He laughed like I was being funny. I wasn't. Then the trash started. Empty water bottles, snack wrappers, those little dog poop bags people never seem to actually throw away. My backyard started looking like the aftermath of a kid's soccer game every other day. I installed a simple private property, no trespassing sign. It was gone by the next morning, replaced with one of theirs. Willow Ridge Nature Path, enjoy responsibly. That one was bolted to a tree? But the worst came about a week after that. I let Rusty out in the evening like I always do. He does a couple laps, marks his favorite spots, sniffs the wind like he's tracking a squirrel revolution, and about 10 minutes later, he came back, limping. At first, I thought it was his hip acting up. He's getting older, like me, but then I noticed the blood on his paw. We checked his foot and found metal, a sliver. Rusty had stepped on a small chunk of metal embedded in a half-chewed sausage link. I took a closer look and found 2 more pieces, stuffed into a slit hot dog and tossed near the fence line. One was bent open like someone had tried to make it more biteable. It wasn't just trash anymore. I stood there with that booby-trapped bratwurst in one hand and Rusty curled against my leg, and something in me just snapped. Not loudly, not with yelling. Just that quiet steel twist in your chest when you realize someone isn't just being a nuisance, they're trying to hurt what matters to you. I drove straight to the HOA office the next morning with the hot dog bag in a Ziploc and Rusty's vet bill in my back pocket. I didn't bother with the receptionist this time. I pushed straight through to the conference room where Deirdre was mid-meeting, clipboard in hand, talking about flowerbed uniformity like it was a national crisis. She had the nerve to smile at me. "Mr. Ellison, we're in the middle of..." I dropped the bag of evidence right on the table, interrupting whatever pastel nightmare of a PowerPoint they were about to unveil. "Someone's tossing meat laced with metal shrapnel into my yard," I said, calm and low. "My dog's paw was bleeding last night. He could have died. You want to talk about community beautification? Start by cleaning up the psychopath you've got lurking around the fence line." A couple people gasped. One guy just stared at the bag like it might bite him. Deirdre's face didn't move an inch. "Mr. Ellison, surely you're not suggesting..." "I'm not suggesting, I'm telling you, this is attempted animal cruelty, and it happened after your people started treating my backyard like a shortcut to Starbucks. I want the signs down. I want your people off my land. And if I see one more jogger near my shed, I will start pressing charges." Her expression twisted into something polite and poisonous. "Mr. Ellison, we understand you're upset, but making threats won't help anyone. Perhaps your property's lack of integration with the community is causing tension." "Integration?" I said. "Lady, this isn't a Wi-Fi network, it's private property, and your HOA is causing a hell of a lot more than tension." I left before I said something I'd regret, but not before I noticed the flicker of discomfort in one board member's eyes. A woman I hadn't seen before, quiet, watching, like she wasn't totally on board with whatever Deirdre was shoveling. Still, that night, someone dumped mulch on my gravel driveway. Not a little, a truckload. I had to dig my own truck out just to get to work the next day. That was it. No more trying to talk sense into people who only spoke the language of dominance and HOA-approved shrubbery. They wanted a war of attrition. Fine, but they were about to learn I knew how to dig in deeper than they did, and I had a hell of a longer fuse. I'm not a lawsuit guy. I've always believed that most problems can be solved with a decent conversation, a little patience, and maybe a beer on the porch if things got tense. So before I went full scorched earth on these people, I figured I'd give diplomacy one last shot. I started by calling the county records office to confirm for the 100th time that my land wasn't part of the HOA. The lady on the phone, Nancy, bless her, sounded both sympathetic and mildly amused. "Mr. Ellison," she said, tapping keys loud enough for me to hear, "your parcel's not under any HOA governance. Never has been. Not according to our zoning maps, not according to the original plat. You're what we call a lucky holdout." She chuckled like I'd won some game I didn't know I was playing. I didn't feel lucky. Not with joggers traipsing across my grass and Rusty limping around the kitchen like a war veteran. Nancy emailed me the zoning maps and even mailed a certified hard copy, just in case the HOA wanted to pretend PDFs weren't real. That was step 1. Step 2 was my lawyer. Well, a lawyer. A buddy of mine from high school recommended this guy named Darren, a young attorney who looked like he still had college debt and a grudge against anyone in a polo shirt. I liked him immediately. We met at a local coffee shop. He showed up with a laptop, a stack of printed out county records, and a face that said, "I've been waiting my whole life to slap an HOA with paperwork." "You've got a solid case," he said after going through everything. "They've got no legal authority on your land. The fence removal? That's trespassing and destruction of private property. The signs? Unauthorized posting? The hot dog incident? I can't prove it was them, but it sure smells like retaliatory harassment." "What about the zoning crap Deirdre keeps quoting?" I asked. "It's like quoting the pirate code," he smirked. "Sounds impressive, means nothing." I like Darren more with every sentence. He suggested we start with a formal cease and desist letter. Not aggressive, just firm. Outline the boundaries, demand they remove their signs, stay off my land, and replace the fence. Or pay for it. That letter went out certified mail the next morning with all the proper legal mumbo-jumbo. You know what I got in return? A 2-sentence reply printed on Willow Ridge HOA letterhead. "Thank you for your correspondence. We believe there has been a misunderstanding regarding community access alignment and will review your request at the next scheduled board meeting." You ever get a letter so smug it makes your teeth itch? That meeting? It wasn't for another 6 weeks. Darren rolled his eyes so hard I thought he might sprain something. They're stonewalling you, standard HOA playbook, stall, confuse, intimidate. They think you'll get tired and go away. Spoiler, I wasn't going anywhere. Still, I tried again. I showed up, calmly, politely, to their monthly board meeting. Not the emergency kind where Deirdre sat on her HOA throne, but the regular one where homeowners showed up to argue about lawn heights and community potlucks. I signed up for the open comment portion, waited an hour while people complained about dead azaleas and trash can violations, and then finally got called up to the mic. "Hi, I'm Tom Ellison," I said. "You might know me as the guy whose land you're currently treating like a public trail without permission." Dead silence. "I'm here to ask, again, that you stop encouraging people to trespass on my property, remove the signage that was installed without consent, and replace the fence that your people tore out. I've got documentation showing my land's private, not under your jurisdiction, and I've tried every peaceful route to resolve this." Someone coughed. A few people looked awkwardly down at their phones. "Also," I added, "if one more person throws a dog poop bag into my yard, I'm installing motion-activated sprinklers and setting them to aggressive. Just FYI." A couple people chuckled. Not Deirdre. She sat at the center of the table, fingers laced under her chin like a wannabe Supreme Court justice, and when I finished, she gave me this tight little nod. "Thank you, Mr. Ellison. Your concerns have been noted. We'll deliberate accordingly." Then she banged her little gavel like she was sealing the fate of a criminal empire. That was it. No discussion. No apology. Not even a "we'll get back to you." just vague politeness and cold indifference wrapped in a cardigan. That's when I realized they weren't just stalling. They thought they could wait me out. They figured I'd give up, move on, or cave in and join their little HOA cult out of exhaustion. They didn't expect me to fight back with more than angry words or a strongly worded Facebook post. But that's the thing about people like Deirdre. They confuse quiet for weak. They think patience is surrender. They forget that some of us build our lives with our hands, not with committees. And we know how to hold a line when it matters. I left that meeting with one clear thought in my head. If they wanted to drag this into the mud, I was bringing my boots. About a week after that board meeting, I was still trying to figure out my next move. I'd already priced out materials to rebuild the fence, but it felt wrong to just slap up new posts like nothing had happened. Something about it felt unfinished. Office. And then, out of nowhere, I got a call from Frank Callahan. Now, Frank is the kind of guy who looks like he was born retired. He's about 70, wears the same beige fishing vest no matter the weather, and he was a land surveyor for the county back in the 80s and 90s. We used to chat at the hardware store when I picked up materials for the house. I hadn't seen him in months. He opens with, "Tom, you still living over by the Ridge Trail mess?" I said, "Yeah, still holding the line." "Figured," he said. "Listen, I saw something that might interest you. Was over at the records office today helping my nephew pull a boundary report, and guess what I spotted in the pending files? A miracle. Close, a proposed rezoning application for a new gated expansion of Willow Ridge Estates, filed by some development group tied to Deirdre's husband. Guess which lot they're planning to run primary access through?" I paused. "Mine." Bingo, the site map shows your land marked as planned entry corridor and green buffer. That hit me like a sucker punch. Not adjacent landscaping. Not natural easement. They were planning to run a road through my backyard. Everything clicked into place right then. The fake friendly letter, the missing fence, the sudden uptick in walkers, the ridiculous trail signs. They weren't just trying to blend my land into the neighborhood for community cohesion. They were softening me up, conditioning the neighborhood to think of my land as public before they filed anything official. And when the road plans came through, they'd just shrug and say, "Well, it's basically already being used that way. Might as well formalize it." It was sleazy, it was calculated, and it was all being done behind closed doors. I asked Frank for a copy. He said he'd accidentally printed an extra set and would drop them off that afternoon. The man winked through the phone. He showed up at 4:15 with a manila folder thick enough to give a lawyer whiplash. Inside, aerial diagrams, rezoning requests, internal memos, all showing that Deirdre's husband, one Alan Langford, had partnered with a developer to build 12 luxury townhomes and needed a new road to skirt existing infrastructure costs. And that road? It wasn't going through HOA land, it was going right through mine. Worse, they'd filed the rezoning with a forged community consent letter supposedly signed by multiple property owners, including one T. Ellison. Let me repeat that. They forged my signature on a document saying I approved a rezoning plan that would bulldoze my workshop and turn my quiet backyard into a luxury on-ramp. I just stood there flipping through the pages like I'd found a villain's diary. And suddenly all that smug politeness, all the stonewalling, all the community speak BS, it all made sense. They weren't protecting the neighborhood's visual harmony. They were flipping it for profit. And I was the last piece they hadn't bought, bullied or buried. I remember Rusty padding up beside me and resting his head on my boot, like even he knew the gravity of what I'd just found. They forged my name. They plotted to run construction through my home. And they thought I'd just sit back and let them. That was the moment I stopped playing defense. It was time to show them exactly what happens when the quiet guy on the edge of town decides to fight back. I spent the rest of that evening sitting at my kitchen table surrounded by copies of zoning maps, forged signatures, and a bottle of bourbon that got lighter by the hour. Rusty snored under the table like none of this was his problem, and honestly, I envied him. But somewhere between page 17 of the development proposal and the second pour, the fog lifted and I saw it, not just what they were doing, but how to beat them at their own game. I didn't need to yell, I didn't need to throw punches or threaten lawsuits. All I needed was to shine the brightest damn light I could right on the thing they were most scared of. Proof. Public, undeniable, humiliating proof. Deirdre and her HOA minions thrived in the shadows. Fake zoning terms, buried applications, letters that went missing, neighbor gossip used like currency. They needed silence, they needed people like me to give up and shut up. But what they really couldn't handle? A crowd. So I made a list, I mean a real list, not one of those angry on the fridge kinds. A plan, line by line. Step 1, call Darren. My lawyer, the baby-faced legal gremlin who'd practically vibrated when I told him about the forged rezoning letter. He came over the next day with coffee, 3 pens, and a voice recorder. "You got him, man," he said, eyes wide as he thumbed through the documents Frank had brought me. "This is fraud, zoning fraud, land use fraud, maybe even criminal conspiracy. Hell, we could probably nail him on identity theft if we really wanted." I just nodded. "Let's not go nuclear yet. I want public fallout, not just a court win." He blinked. "You want to humiliate them?" "Exactly." Step 2. Reach out to allies. There were people in the neighborhood who weren't exactly Deirdre fans. I knew because I'd started getting little comments, quiet support. A guy named Paul across the road who got fined for repainting his shutters the wrong shade of beige. Mrs. Tran 2 houses down, who was told to cut down her rose bushes because they blocked sidewalk visibility. Even Sharon, that board member with the guilty conscience from the last HOA meeting, I hadn't missed the way she'd looked at the floor when Deirdre dismissed me. I called a few, visited others, kept it simple. You ever feel like this HOA doesn't just enforce rules, they invent them? You'd be amazed how quickly people open up when you give them a safe place to tell the truth. Turns out, half the board didn't even know about the rezoning proposal. Deirdre had pushed it through under some executive discretion clause buried in a sub-bylaw. I had a real-life HOA mutiny brewing and I hadn't even made it to Step 3 yet. Step 3, call in a favor from an old buddy. Gus, college roommate, former radio guy turned local podcast host, covered everything from school board drama to city planning beefs, had a voice like whiskey over gravel and a growing audience that loved a good underdog story. I texted him, "Ever cover an HOA trying to illegally rezone a guy's backyard into a developer's private driveway?" He responded in 10 seconds. "On my way. Tell me you've got documents." Oh, I had documents. I had maps, fake signatures, land records, timeline breakdowns, everything. Gus showed up with a mic, a camera, and a smile that said, "We're gonna ruin someone's week." We recorded the interview right there in my yard. Rusty made a few guest appearances, looking extremely betrayed that he wasn't allowed on my lap. "I just want to be clear," I said to the camera, holding up the zoning map. "They forged my name, tried to erase my fence, and now they're planning to turn my land into a road for luxury townhomes I didn't ask for, don't benefit from, and legally can't be forced to support. And the worst part? They figured no one would notice. Or care." Spoiler, people noticed. Step 4, give them one last chance. After everything was in place, legal notices prepped, neighbors warned, podcast queued for launch, I sent one final email to the Willow Ridge HOA. No threats, no name-calling, just the truth. You have 48 hours to remove all unauthorized signage, replace the damaged fence, and issue a public acknowledgement that my land is privately owned and not subject to rezoning. Failure to do so will result in public exposure and legal action. I signed it politely, attached the relevant documents. They didn't respond. Of course they didn't, but by the time they realized what was coming, it wouldn't matter. Because next week, Gus was dropping the episode, my neighbors were getting copies of the real zoning maps, Darren was filing for injunctive relief, and I had a little outdoor surprise planned for the next community walkthrough. Let's just say, it involved a projector, a few folding chairs, and Deirdre's signature right next to mine. The fake one, in color. Let the HOA games begin. The following Saturday, I set the trap. It started early, 7 a.m. early, when I dragged out a folding table, a stack of lawn chairs, and an extension cord that snaked across the grass like a grounded power line waiting for a purpose. I propped up a portable projector screen in the corner of the yard, just visible from the sidewalk, and taped a hand-painted sign to the fence in progress. Community update tonight. BYOC, bring your own chair. Then I sat back and waited. Now, Deirdre loved nothing more than her scheduled HOA walkthroughs. She'd strut the neighborhood with her clipboard and 2 lackeys like some kind of suburban drill sergeant, pointing at grass lengths and noting down non-compliance infractions like she was writing tickets in the afterlife. One of those walkthroughs just so happened to be scheduled for that afternoon. What a coincidence. Around 4 p.m., they came into view, right on schedule. Deirdre in her pastel blazer and wedge heels, flanked by a guy I only knew as Carl, real name, real foggy, and Sharon, the board member with the constantly guilty eyes. I was sitting in a camping chair on my lawn, sipping iced tea like I was waiting for the pregame show. Deirdre glanced at the sign, then she saw the screen, and then she saw me, smiling like I'd just learned how to cheat at poker and brought my own deck. She slowed her pace. "What is this?" she called out, tone already loaded with suspicion. I stood, nice and casual. "Neighborhood presentation, community engagement, you're into that, right?" She narrowed her eyes but didn't respond. Sharon, to her credit, looked like she wanted to vanish into a hedge. That evening, just before sunset, folks started trickling in, some from Willow Ridge, a few from outside the HOA. Most were people I'd personally invited. Paul, Mrs. Tran, a couple younger couples who'd had their own run-ins with HOA overreach. Even the guy with the yoga mat showed up, though this time he stayed on the sidewalk like a trained puppy. I counted about 30 people by the time we started. I stood up in front of the screen, gave a little nod, and said, "Appreciate y'all coming. I know it's not movie night, but I figured you might want to see what your HOA's been up to behind the curtain." Then I hit play. What followed was a tight 10-minute video Gus had edited for maximum punch. Voiceover, screen recordings of the rezoning documents, side-by-side comparison of my actual signature and the fake one, annotated zoning maps, even an animated arrow tracing the proposed development's access road, straight through my backyard. The crowd was dead silent at first. Then came the muttering. Sharon, seated near the back, put a hand to her mouth. A guy I didn't even know muttered "holy hell" like it was church. And then, just as the video ended with the words, "Would you trust these people with your neighborhood?" someone asked the obvious. "Wait, they forged your name? Isn't that a felony?" I turned around, looked directly at Deirdre, who had, by the way, shown up 5 minutes into the video and tried to hang back like some nosy neighbor just out for a walk, and said loud enough for the whole lawn to hear, "That's what the DA's gonna find out." Boom. That was the shot across the bow. But I wasn't done. Next morning, Darren filed the full complaint with the county zoning board, the city ethics committee, and, because we felt like sharing, with the local newspaper. We made sure it wasn't just about my property either. We included witness statements, the community consent letter with the forged signatures, and notes from other neighbors about being misled or stonewalled by the HOA. And Gus? He dropped the podcast episode at midnight. By 8 a.m., it had 12,000 plays and counting. Title? The Fence, the Fraud, and the HOA Queen, a Suburban Cautionary Tale. By lunchtime, my phone was blowing up. Not just neighbors, but local reporters, a guy from the zoning commission, and one lawyer from the Langford Development Group who very politely asked if we could discuss options. I told him to direct all inquiries to Darren. The next HOA meeting, originally scheduled for a quiet Thursday evening in the clubhouse, turned into a full-blown town hall. Packed house, standing room only, news van out front. Deirdre tried to control the narrative, opened the meeting with a statement about misunderstandings and community miscommunication. But when I walked up to the mic and held up the forged consent form, dead. Silence. "This isn't a misunderstanding," I said. "This is fraud. And if you think you can bulldoze a man's land and get away with it just because you know the city planner and married the guy filing the permits, you're in for a rude awakening." Applause. Like actual applause. The HOA crowd. The beige jacket, rule-following, mailbox painting crowd. They were clapping for me. And that's when I knew. This wasn't just my fight anymore. They'd pushed too far, gone too greedy, and in doing so, they turned an independent homeowner into a community rallying point. I walked back to my seat, Rusty trotting behind me like he was escorting a war hero, and I felt something I hadn't felt in months. Control. The tide had turned. Public exposure isn't always some big Hollywood moment. Sometimes it's just watching the people who thought they ran the show realize they're not even holding the remote anymore. The real unraveling started the Monday after that town hall. By then, Gus's podcast had climbed into the top 5 of the regional charts. Local Facebook groups were in full meltdown, threads with titles like "HOA President Accused of Forgery" and "Deirdre Drama, What Else Are They Hiding?" popping up every 5 minutes. People who hadn't talked to me in years were suddenly commenting on my posts like we were best friends. The local paper ran a front-page spread with the headline, "Backyard Battleground, Homeowner Accuses HOA of Fraud and Forgery." And there, printed dead center, was a screenshot of the forged consent form with my signature circled in red and a caption underneath. Signature discrepancy noted by legal counsel. Discrepancy, that's putting it politely. My real signature has a clean loop in the T. The fake looked like someone wrote it with their left hand in a moving vehicle. Deirdre didn't show her face for 3 days. Then, midweek, I saw her walking her dog like nothing had happened, sunglasses on, chin up, posture set to "I still own this block." She made it halfway down the street before an older guy named Vince, retired Navy, HOA member since 2006, walked up and asked real loud, "Hey Deirdre, is this sidewalk part of your planned development access corridor too, or can we walk here without you forging something?" She turned right back around and beelined for her front porch. Then came the real hammer, the zoning board hearing. They scheduled it for Friday morning at City Hall. Darren and I showed up in full prep mode, him in a clean navy suit, me in my best I work with my hands but clean up well, flannel and boots. We had a binder, the thickness of a church hymnal, and a PowerPoint presentation with all the good stuff. The timeline, the signatures, the maps, the forged letter, the HOA's own correspondence contradicting itself in real time. Deirdre showed up late. No husband, no developer buddies, just her, looking like she hadn't slept in a week. The board chair opened with, "We've received a formal complaint regarding zoning application 47-2209, and we've also received substantial evidence of procedural violations, including suspected document forgery." Deirdre tried to object, claimed it was all a misunderstanding and that Mr. Ellison had verbally expressed openness to integration. I just leaned into the mic and said, "I'm a licensed contractor. I don't express things verbally. I sign paperwork. Real paperwork." Darren dropped the two versions of my signature on the overhead projector, side by side, crystal clear, and for the next 30 minutes, we walked them through it all. Every shady maneuver, every fake signature, every neighbor statement, every zoning map that had suddenly been adjusted to better align with the developer's fantasy. At one point, the commissioner just flat out asked, "Ms. Langford, did you or anyone on the HOA board authorize these documents to be filed without Mr. Ellison's consent?" And Deirdre, without blinking, said, "I was under the impression the board had authority to act in the neighborhood's best interest." Oof, wrong answer. The board chair leaned forward and said flatly, "That is not how private property works, ma'am." Boom. They shut the whole rezoning proposal down right there, full rejection, filed publicly. Worse for her? The board announced a formal audit of Willow Ridge HOA, citing financial irregularities and governance concerns, which is code for, "We're about to dig through every dollar and every decision you've ever touched." That afternoon, two more board members, Sharon and some guy named Greg, who I swear had been asleep since 2019, resigned. Their official statements included phrases like "disturbed by recent revelations" and "betrayal of community trust." The cherry on top? A young reporter from the local ABC affiliate, Rebecca something, sharp eyes, fresh out of journalism school, did a 10-minute segment in front of my half-rebuilt fence, featuring interviews with me, Darren, and even Frank Callahan, my surveyor-turned-whistleblower. Rusty made it on camera too, because of course he did. America loves a good dog. And Deirdre? She went full radio silent. The HOA issued a public statement the next morning saying she had voluntarily stepped down pending investigation, a fancy way of saying she was pushed so hard out the door she left skid marks. Turns out her husband's development deal wasn't just dead, it was toxic. The city council wanted nothing to do with it now that it was attached to fraud allegations. Investors pulled out. A rumor even floated around that his firm was quietly trying to rebrand. From where I sat, it was beautiful. Because now, every time someone Googled Willow Ridge HOA, they weren't getting landscaping tips. They were getting me. The guy who stood up, called out the fraud, and proved that just because you live in a quiet neighborhood doesn't mean you're a pushover. They tore down my fence thinking it would make me weaker. Instead, they handed me a stage. It's been about 6 months since the whole mess blew up. The fence is back, stronger than ever. I rebuilt it with pressure-treated lumber, steel brackets, and a post-hole depth that'd make a structural engineer weep with joy. Rusty supervised the entire project, of course, occasionally offering feedback in the form of disapproving snorts and well-timed yawns. I added a new sign to the entrance, too, carved it myself, hung it right at eye level. Private property, trespassers will be politely educated, then prosecuted. The HOA doesn't bother me anymore. The few board members who stuck around after the scandal are mostly in damage control mode, apologizing, reorganizing, trying to pretend like the Deirdre era was some strange fever dream the whole community had together. Sharon dropped off a pie the week after the audit ended. Cherry, store-bought crust, but the sentiment was there. And Deirdre? She sold her house and moved to North Carolina. No farewell parties, no goodbye letters, no "thanks for letting me try to bulldoze your life." Just a cold real estate listing and a for sale sign that disappeared as fast as she did. Last I heard, her husband left the development firm and someone filed an ethics complaint with the state zoning board. I don't know what happened after that, don't care much either. The thing is, I didn't set out to ruin anyone, I just wanted them to leave me alone. I wanted my peace, my land, my damn fence. Now, on most evenings, I sit out on the porch with Rusty, a cold drink in hand, and watch the sun sink behind the trees. The backyard's quiet again, no joggers, no garbage, no HOA goons measuring my grass with passive-aggressive clipboards. The trail signs are gone. The fake community access markers have been pulled up and hauled off. And that half-finished road they tried to sneak through? Wildflowers have taken over. Nature reclaiming what's hers, like the land knows it dodged a bullet. Sometimes I get visitors, neighbors who never used to talk to me now drop by with beer or barbecue invites. One guy even asked if I'd consider running for the HOA board. I told him I'd rather lick a hot lawnmower. But it's good to know people see me differently now, not as the cranky fence guy, but as someone who stood his ground. Literally. Last weekend, I built a new gate on the side of the property. It's locked most of the time, but I gave keys to a few folks, Paul, Mrs. Tran, and Sharon, who's been making a real effort. We call it the trust gate. Because here's the thing, community doesn't mean control. It doesn't mean rules written by people who've never touched a shovel. It sure as hell doesn't mean lying to your neighbors to make a buck. Community means respect, boundaries, knowing when to lend a hand, and when to keep your damn hands off other people's fences. My dad would have liked that gate. He'd definitely laugh at the story, and I think wherever he is, he's proud that I didn't back down, that I stood up the way he taught me, calm, steady, and just stubborn enough to outlast the storm. Anyway, that's the whole thing. All because someone tore down my fence thinking it was just wood. Turns out, it was a line they really shouldn't have crossed.